Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to see you here today. Today, we're going to be talking about the Women's Leadership Program in MIT Sloan's Executive Education. And I'm so delighted to have you all here. Just to do some quick introductions, my name is Johanna Hissing de Fabio, though everyone or most people call me Jo, not the Dame. I'm the Assistant Dean of the Executive Degree Programs, and I am joined here today with Molly Schneider, who is the program director for the Women's Leadership Program, and of course, the woman of the show, or the star of our show today, Fiona Murray, who is a faculty member here at Sloan. She's also the Associate Dean of Innovation and was recently named a Dame. And I'm sure there are many more introductions that I could say about you, Fiona, but is there anything else about your background that you would like to highlight before we move on to questions?
I've been a member of MIT Sloan's faculty since 2000. It's an extraordinary place to work and learn, so I'm really excited to be talking about what we're doing. And I'm also really pleased to be the faculty co-director of this Women's Leadership Program with my friend and colleague, Dr. Elspeth Johnson. Elspeth couldn't be with us today, and I'm not sure I can do justice to everything she would say, but we are a great faculty team, and it's always brilliant to be working with Sloan Executive Education.
Absolutely. And we're so excited that you launched the Women's Leadership Program last year to great success, and excited to host it again this year. And thought we would start. Well, actually, maybe mention one thing, that in the United States, this month is Women's History Month. And so it is great to be focusing on this topic this month. And so perhaps starting off talking a little bit about what holds women leaders back from gaining or maximizing power. Can these issues be resolved, and how?
Yes, thank you, Jo. I think that's just an important place to start, isn't it, really? We start with the question that I think many of us want the answer to, which is to say, we see this opportunity, we see the need for change in the world around us, whether it's in our communities, in our organizations, in the businesses that we run and lead. And I think we often ask ourselves the question, how do we get our hands on the power that we know we need to really make the difference? And we know that women are not held back by a lack of smarts. They're not held back by a lack of ambition. But we do know that we are often held back by a few key things. So one is by having more limited networks. Do we always have the networks of the individuals around us who we think can help us get our hands on the power that we need to make the difference that we want to make? The second is really, I think, the willingness to claim that we are ambitious, to not say, oh, you don't need to pick me, but in fact, to say, actually, I really do want to make a difference and to make a change, and I am going to put myself forward. And so we do need to make sure that we have the right ways to be comfortable claiming power. And I think the third thing that I think about a lot, and I think about this for myself in my own career, for the many women of different generations that I have the opportunity to mentor, is to really have a conscious focus on our goals. It's not just to allow our careers and our ambitions to sort of meander, but rather to say every year, what is it that I'm trying to accomplish? Why does that matter to me? And how am I going to get there? And so that real conscious focus on what you want to accomplish, then I think allows us to think about building our networks, building our other skill sets, building our presence, in fact, as well, our sort of physical presence in the world, not being shy of existing and claiming the seat at the table that I think is so important to all of us.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, especially around the goal setting. And you said a couple of words there that I think at times we shy away from: power. What do you think about that? I always say that, do we want power? Feels like such an icky word. How do we get over thinking about power as an icky word?
Yeah. It does, doesn't it? It's one of those words that you sort of slightly cringe and say, how could I possibly want that? The way I like to think about it is to say, what do I want to accomplish? Right? What outcomes really matter to me? Right? They may matter to me individually. They may matter to the team that I lead. They may matter to the organization that I'm part of. Or they may matter to the organization that I lead, or the organization that I want to build if I'm an entrepreneur, or the scientific outcomes that matter to me if I'm a scientist or an inventor of some kind. So I think I always like to start there and then say, all right, what do I need to do to accomplish those things? Who are the people that I need to have around me? And although there are obviously many accomplished humans, I might sometimes think that I'm the best person to get the job done. And for me, that feels like a responsibility as much as it feels like an opportunity. So if I'm the best person to get that job done, to build the team, to be motivated by the team and to motivate them, then it starts to help me feel a little more comfortable, and women feel more comfortable with the idea that power gives you the opportunity to make the change that really does matter, that you want to make in your organizations. So when I think about it that way, I feel like I'm not wanting power for its own sake. I'm wanting it because there are really important goals that I might have. And I really want them to be done quickly and effectively, with a minimum amount of fuss, I suppose. So that's really how I start to think about it. And in the program, we spend some time on this, really helping the women in the program understand their goals and to sort of work backwards to understand what would they need to be doing to accomplish those goals? What sort of power do they need? What are the resources? And then what's holding us back? So what are the things that are holding us back? Whether, the behaviors that got us to our current roles, the networks and so on. So how do we really then think about breaking this down in a more systematic sort of way?
Yeah. Molly, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, I mean, if we're going to talk a bit about networks as well, I think that in this program, something that's so important is that there is a group of women in the room who are facing similar issues. Many are in male-dominated industries, and it's an opportunity that most of us don't have to really sit back and look at yourself for 4 days. And so, last year was our first run, but there was definitely an energy in the room that is a little different than if we're doing a 2-day accounting program, right? There was an almost immediate sense of psychological safety. There was a lot of deep sharing, and based on the alumni network, I feel there was a lot of conversations that came out of the program that continued far beyond those 4 days that we had together.
Yeah, Molly, I think, it's funny. I obviously was, co-leading the program with Elspeth, and I found myself both in the sessions I was leading, but in the sessions that I was, sitting in the back of the room as Elspeth was leading, doing most of the exercises and activities and self-reflection for myself, as well as with and for the people in the room. I don't think we always give ourselves enough time to actually reflect on what's important to us. I think women in particular, we know there's lots of evidence to suggest, carry an enormous burden of work and effort in the workplace and at home and in our communities. And the thing that often gives the thing that we don't make time for is ourselves. And whether that's for our physical health, our mental health, just our general well-being. But taking that time out to actually think about what your goals are and to learn some new tools and methods to accomplish those things feels like a very important thing that we should and must do for ourselves and for the people around us. And I definitely felt as if in that room, in the classroom over the course of the 4 days we were together, that we both created that space to do that. We provided a lot of encouragement to one another to think about those things, and to really say it's okay to talk about these things. And it's also all right to share stories of where things haven't been so easy. And with those stories to also share tips and tricks, if you like, but actually most of our work is very grounded in deep academic research of what we know works. But we can all bring those to life by sharing specific personal experiences, so that we know this is not just an academic problem, it's a problem that we all face. And so we can all work together. So Molly, I think your description of the 4 days is absolutely spot on.
Yeah, it sounds like such an amazing opportunity to take some time for yourself, be able to really think about what is it that I want to do? And instead of being in the grind of the day, whether you are managing other people's lives, your own lives, managing your team, really taking the opportunity to think about what's important to you, and to have a shared experience with other people who have been there as well, or are having similar experiences, and to support each other to get to, your hopes and dreams, which sounds absolutely amazing. There's a lot of talk about authenticity and being an authentic leader, and how can you have power with authenticity. Any thoughts on that?
Yes. So again, when we think about the tools that we want to teach in the classroom and the insights that we want to share, they do come down to a number of different sort of behaviors and practices and things that we can get better at. They include behaviors around negotiation, behaviors around building networks, even behaviors around how we show up in meetings, how we speak, how we present ourselves. And one of the comments that we sometimes get as we're teaching this toolkit, as I like to think of it, is somebody will say, well, but that's not my authentic self. So, for example, we will say that in meetings, on average, women tend to talk more. Once they start speaking, they give a lot of introductory remarks. And we know that because women might hear them and say, all right, we're following you along, men will switch off typically much more quickly and say, well, why hasn't she got to the point? You have two choices in that room. One is that you can continue to do it that way, but risk perhaps not having your point land. And the other is to try out some different styles, some ways of being, some shorter ways of getting to the point, some more classically blue, let's call them, ways of doing things. And some of my students, my young female students particularly, say, but that isn't my authentic self. And my comment back is always, what does that mean, right? We are complex human beings. And I think the way I think about showing up in our workplaces and elsewhere is about what are the elements of myself that I want to focus on and bring forward and bring into the room? And what are those pieces that I'm going to leave a little bit backstage? And so I'm going to create still an authentic Fiona, but I'm going to pick and choose those things. And I'm also going to practice new ways of being, because frankly, at the end of the day, I'm most interested in whether my ideas are being heard and my contributions are being recognized, and I can really make that difference. And so I think that idea of authenticity, sometimes we mistake that for thinking we have to bring our entire self into any given situation, when I think we can still be extremely authentic, but by picking the facets of ourselves that we want to bring to any particular context and situation.
Yeah, and we're human beings, and so we're constantly evolving. So shouldn't our authentic self be evolving as well?
I think it should. And I think, Jo, we've known each other for a long time, and you and I both see how each of us has changed. And Molly, right, when we sort of show up in a room, we're probably different than when we walked into that room 10 years ago. The way we sort of feel more comfortable with the position and the power and the authority that we have, how we choose to use that. That doesn't mean we've all become incredibly serious all the time, but it does mean that we have to get comfortable, I think, recognizing that we do have power and we need to wield it in really important ways to get the job done.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about sort of ourselves. What changes can I make in my organization that will help other women?
So I think of this as a sort of, again, a sort of a network or almost a pyramid, where we're kind of saying, well, if I'm at the top of my team, whether that be an enormous team in a large organization or a small team or a startup team, I am going to come back from a program like this with a set of new tools and insights, whether it be about, the goals that I have, the networks that I want to build, the negotiations and the way of being, or even frankly, the presence, right? Because we do quite a lot of work around sort of physical presence, how I think physically about showing up in a space. And I want to then make sure that the people that work with me also are armed with some of those messages and tools. So I hope that people will go back and share some of those things. I also want to make sure that when I know that there are particular things in meetings, for example, again, meetings are where a lot of the work happens, and it's often the place where we know that gender differences will lead to differences in who's being heard in the room. And so I want to make sure if I'm a leader, if there are quiet individuals in the room, who may just come from different backgrounds, often the women in the room, but also people perhaps for whom English isn't their first language, or where there are cultural differences. I want to make sure that I have those that toolkit to say, oh, but Joe, I haven't heard from you. What do you think? Or, Molly, I know that you've had some thoughts about this. Let me just, ask this question, and then I'm going to come back to you. So I've given Molly a few minutes, so she's not in a panic. But, I know I'm going to hear her voice. I'm going to bring those voices into the room. I'm also going to practice some of the things that we talk about that are really important with networks and amplifying the ideas. That experience when you sit in a meeting and you say something, and then, the sort of 6 foot something or other human boy sitting next to you says almost exactly the same thing. And you think, did you not hear me? How do we deal with that? Right? Well, what we can do, particularly if we're chairing the meeting or the next person to speak, is to basically say, yes, I think, you restated what Fiona said. That was a useful idea. And, Jim, thank you for building on that. Right? I mean, there are ways of doing this where, again, we want to create that space of recognition, of hearing people, of building on their ideas. And these all sound like trivial sort of orchestrations of meetings, and we've got so much work. How can we do that? I think it's actually extremely important, because we really do, to get the outcomes that we need, to get the innovation, which is my area of expertise, to get that innovation, we need the diversity of opinion. And so we have to make sure that ideas are heard and that ideas are valued and evaluated fairly, regardless of who it is who's putting the idea into the room.
Yeah. So this is a LinkedIn Live. We're happy to take questions from the audience. And I see that we've received one from, I hope I pronounced this semi-correctly, Gori P. Asked, I am new to this country and many times I possess the skills for the job, but I do not get opportunities because I do not have a strong network. How do I overcome this, and would this program help? Mm-hmm. So how do we build strategic networks?
Yeah. So Gori, thank you for that question. I think it's an important question. And, like you, I came to this country with, almost no network whatsoever. That was a long time ago now. And I think we can build our networks in a variety of different ways. First, we probably need to know what network we currently have. And so we do run an exercise in the program where we ask you to really think about who's in your network. Are they like you, or are they different from you? How is your network diverse from the perspective of people's age, their expertise, their professions, the countries that they're from? And what we find when we assess those networks is we find that there's an age-old adage that is birds of a feather flock together. What that really is telling us is that people tend to form networks with people who are like them. And that can be incredibly friendly, and it can be warm, and it can be welcoming. And from the point of view of us as sort of social humans, that's very understandable. But for us as professional humans, we need to be able to diversify that network. And so we also start to look at the network and ask the question, what are these people bringing professionally to your network? So are they bringing, again, specific skills? Are they bringing connections to people who are in power? Are they bringing sort of political connectivity, which allows you to get your ideas through the organization, because we know that political power isn't sort of evenly distributed? Are they the people who are going to ultimately be the ones in decision-making roles who perhaps decide on whether you get the next job? And as you start to look at that network, you'll probably see where the gaps are. And so the next thing that we do is to think very carefully about, how would you fill those gaps? How would you identify the sorts of people that you need? And how do we then go about finding those people and building a network with them? And again, a bit like our earlier discussion of power, sometimes I think that can feel like a very instrumental way of behaving. And you might say to me, well, but this doesn't feel authentic. I'm not going to build a network if I'm not friends with somebody. And we want to really distinguish a strategic professional network from simply a friendship network. A strategic network is going to be people that you want to engage with because it's important for your career. And the thing to remember is that they also are trying to do the same thing. even if they're more senior than you, they might really value the experiences that you bring from a different country, because you might be in a global organization. You might be a different generation to them. And so you can bring that experience because there may be customers who you have more insights into. And so I think that we forget that people, even when they're more senior to us, can sometimes really value and benefit from a network of people at all different stages of their careers. And I myself, mentor and have networks with. I'm very honoured to have those with individuals who are my students, some of whom are considerably younger than I am, some about the same age. And I find that to be incredibly refreshing. I learn a lot, and it brings me both energy and insight that I don't have. And so the networks go both ways. And so we'll work a lot on that. That's something that we do in a quite tactical way. And that network building exercise is one that we really encourage people to do on an annual basis. It's almost like a sort of, sort of tidying up your network once a year to sort of, how do you think about it, being strategic, having a strategic view. And so we'll get you started on that in the program.
Well, first of all, Fiona, thank you for the mentoring you have done for me over the years. And this is a good reminder that I need to do a refresh on my networking strategic plan, as I have also done this exercise before. Molly, I wonder, given that you sort of sat in the room when the exercises were done and have been in touch with alumni since, how have you seen these sort of strategic networks play out?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen people come back to us who have identified maybe skill gaps, right? And they'd like to meet people within a field that would be helpful. They've come back to some of our other open programs. They've tried to engage further with folks at MIT. But we also, we have very informal ways of keeping the group in contact. One is a WhatsApp chat group, and I have it muted because it's very active. And we see people reaching out. It's a lot of it is just not shouting into the void, right? Am I the only one facing this issue? And so I think that, as we've mentioned, a big part of the program is building a toolkit and kind of charting a path forward for yourself. We spent some time making commitments, but another part is really taking the opportunity to deeply connect with women who are facing similar challenges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it sounds like it's been an amazing community for them, and lifting each other up, supporting each other, feeling like they have someone that they can talk to as they're going through these issues.
Can I pick up on a comment from the chat? Am I allowed to do that?
Please.
If that's all right. So I think is it Christine who asked, if I think of my your network, which connections do you feel are more beneficial, female or male? And I would say that it's both, right? I don't think that it's incredibly important that we have networks that are of diverse and different people. We all see the world very, very differently. And that is not just a matter of gender. As I've said, it can be age, it could be race, it could be background, right? A lot of why we care about diversity and in our networks is not because we want to sort of check off, do we have somebody in each category of human? It's because different people just have walk through the world in a different way, and they see the world differently. And we can so benefit from those perspectives and those experiences. They also sit in different positions in our organizations and in the organizations that matter to us, again, to try and accomplish our goals. And so in that regard, I think I have found that both male and female members of my network, at least, can be extremely valuable and can really bring a lot of difference to my life and to my own professional accomplishments. And we certainly know that from all of the research evidence. Now, I will say, and I will do this throughout the course, most of what we talk about in the course is absolutely grounded in a lot of academic research that comes from, a large number of my colleagues and myself. And we've done a quite interesting study, actually, of networking and mentoring in a big accelerator program, where entrepreneurs were given mentors and advisors. And then we followed up to see, did those mentors and advisors make ongoing introductions and connections? Did they take that advisory role and turn it into useful professional connectivity? And I will tell you that women are more likely to make ongoing introductions for other women, and men are more likely to make ongoing introductions for other men that they're mentoring. So we do know that there's a little bit of sort of matching in who uses their network. But when we followed up on that study, we actually told the participants in the accelerator the following year that this is what we found in the research. And so as soon as we primed people to that, we actually found that the mentors paid much, much more attention. The male mentor said, oh, hold on a minute. I need to overcome that sort of innate unconscious bias. Let me make sure that I'm asking the women that I'm mentoring, would you like those introductions? Let me not make assumptions, even if perhaps they don't ask in quite such a clear way, and vice versa. And so I have experienced, and the evidence shows that we absolutely need to have networks that have people in different positions, that because in many industries, men are powerful in our organizations and important and bring an enormous amount of advice and opportunity to our networks. We absolutely want them to be there. But we also have to make sure that we ask for the introductions that we want, the support and the guidance that we need, because the evidence suggests it might not always be so naturally likely to flow through the network. And that's a point that I think somebody asked earlier. I think, Toby, you asked whether men involved. I will say that the vast majority of the research that's done in this area is done, I do with my students. I have male and female PhD students. It's done with my faculty colleagues. My colleague, Emilio Castilla, has done some extraordinary work on networks and gender and diversity and difference in employment and employee selection and employee evaluation. And so we are absolutely a team with really different backgrounds contributing to all the underlying insights that we're going to be sharing in this program.
So maybe this is an interesting time to talk a little bit more specifically about the program, like why attend the MIT Women's Leadership Program? Why is this different from other women's leadership program? And I want to piggyback a little bit on a question we received in chat, which was from Toby. Do you have any or many men involved in researching, preparing, or delivering the program?
Absolutely. As I said, the underlying research base that really is the foundation for the program has been generated by many of my colleagues over the years, and with me, my co-authors and my students. And those are obviously people from really different backgrounds, economists, sociologists, psychologists, male and female, international, American, and so on. So it's a very diverse group. In the room, in the program, we've made a very specific and conscious decision that we would run a women-only program. And we did that for a specific reason, which is that there's a very significant body of evidence that the way in which women both show up in the workplace and the way in which their contributions are met and experienced is different than that of, a man. Particularly, and frankly, that's really what we're really saying is it's different than the group that has been the predominant group in the workplace. And so what we recognized was that there was a need to teach a toolkit that we could give to women to allow them to both understand these issues of power and goals and what you're trying to accomplish, but also the toolkit of how to get that done in the professional world that we currently inhabit, which is a world which tends to experience the ideas and contributions of women a little differently than those that men are often putting forward. And so we wanted that to be a space where we could discuss the evidence-based toolkit, because we knew that was going to really make a difference. And in our first run through, I think we really did benefit from that. And again, we're not sitting here saying it's somebody's fault. This is the way that the world works. And we want to arm everybody with the tools and techniques that they need to be able to really be as successful as possible.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, this is one program we offer that is just for women. And I don't know how many program, is it 45, Molly?
90 plus if you count our purely online programs, yes.
So if we're including the online program, 90 plus program that are open to all, there is one that's for women. And so I think, there is evidence, right? And I think the piece too is that women are leaving the workforce or not able to get from the manager level and higher up. And so this is a way to create the toolkit for women to be able to rise within the ranks.
Yeah.
We received.
Also, if I can just jump in on one more thing of kind of what sets us apart. Another very intentional choice we've made is the size of the classroom. We have capped this to feel very personal and intimate. We won't have more than 40 participants. We wanted a big enough group for there to be diversity of voices in the room, diversity of experience, but small enough that there's opportunity for real coaching, feedback, and to kind of build deeper connections, which kind of feels a little harder when you're in a group of 70, 75. So I do think that's something to call out, as well as kind of what may set us apart from other similar programs.
Thanks, Molly. I should have mentioned that, or given you the floor earlier. I think there's another really interesting question from Trip D. So I'm going to shift and make sure we're answering questions too from the audience. So feel free to ask questions. So Trip D's question is: at times you have a seat at the table, however, you do not have a voice. Then what should we do?
So Tripti, thank you for that. Yes, I think that's probably something that all of us have felt at some time or another. And as I alluded to earlier, sometimes you've actually even spoken up and then somebody near you says exactly the same thing and you think, was I invisible? And so I think we've all had that sense of being a little invisible at the table. I'd say a few things. So there's definitely a value in how we even start in a meeting, how we come to a meeting and where we sit at the table. And again, if my colleague Elspeth was here, she would remind us that it's extremely useful to arrive early to meetings and to sit next to whoever is the boss at the top of the table, not least because sometimes that gives you the opportunity to just sort of lean over and say, I'd like to make a contribution. It's also useful sometimes, if you know the topic of the meeting, to perhaps talk to one or two of your colleagues beforehand and to note that you specifically would like to contribute, that you've been working on something. So those are some of the methods that I think we can use. When we do speak, I think it's really important to get to the point quickly. And this is something that in my experience takes time. You have to practice. What's the point I want to make? How do I make that interjection where I can really make my point? And then I can go back and perhaps explain the context and why I've made the point I've made. Again, when you look at communication style, we often find women taking a long time doing context setting. And so let's make sure that our voice is heard by really getting to the point quickly and as effectively as we can. And we'll talk about that in the program. So as you'll see, we'll go backwards and forwards between things like our strategic networks, understanding power, thinking about our long-term goals, but we'll get right down into this toolkit of things like, being present in meetings, having that sort of general physical presence. So we will do quite a lot of things that are around our sort of physical and mental presence and resilience, because we know that that matters. Some of it's about voice, right? It's about how we sound. We know when women get nervous, their voices get higher. And that makes it even more difficult to sort of be heard, or we speak more quietly. And so we've got to do a lot of work just physically on just becoming more and more comfortable as we're in bigger and bigger rooms, both literally and also metaphorically. So we are going to build this toolkit together, which will include some of those sorts of things about having our voice heard. But as Molly said, the other thing that is important is not just making sure our voice is heard, but if we're leading meetings, making sure that the voice of the other women around the table, that they're heard. And Jo, I know that this happens in our classrooms because we've often encouraged the students, is that, we can amplify the voices of those around us. And so if we have a female colleague who perhaps we don't feel has been heard, but we have an opportunity to speak up in the room, we can acknowledge their contribution, build on it, and so on. And so I think that sort of acknowledging of others and lifting them up and their voice, and recognizing that we can talk about the team that I lead. And so this is one of the things that also we talk a lot about, is how to make sure that we make it clear that we are leading others and that we're welcoming and we welcome their contributions, but also claiming what we're doing. And we'll talk quite a bit about this thing called the double bind, right? The idea that as a woman, you're expected to be sort of warm and friendly. And yet, if you're warm and friendly, you often don't get the credit for the accomplishments that you've made. And so you're sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't, because if you just say, I did this, people will experience that in a quite negative way. And so we talk about sort of how to describe this, to talk, as I've said, about saying, the team that I lead has made these extraordinary accomplishments, right? The organization that I've built. So really recognizing others, but taking ownership, if you like, claiming the power and accomplishment. And so much of this will feel like small tips and tricks, but the toolkit is grounded in this broader strategic plan that we hope will help you have, and in this toolkit that we think will last a considerable time and be really helpful for you.
Yeah. I think Matea has a really interesting question, or sort of seeking some advice, which is looking back at your career, what is one piece of advice you wish you had received earlier, and how has it influenced your approach to leadership and decision making?
Mhm. I mean, I think that the advice that would have been very helpful is to recognize that this idea of really having a set of sort of well-articulated goals that we can walk towards, and that we then need to claim, our place at the table as we move towards those things would have probably been very helpful. I mean, I'm very fortunate. I've had a really, really interesting career and continue to have one. And in academia, there's a fairly clear career path. But there's a lot of other things that many academics do, myself included. I sit on boards, I've helped build other kinds of organizations. And I think for many years, I waited to be invited to do those things. And eventually I thought, nobody's asking me to do those things. Let me step forward and say, I want to participate. I'd like to do those things. I'm interested in participating in this outside board activity or building this organization. And I found people to be really delighted and welcoming in many instances. And I think had just simply thought I wasn't interested. And so I suppose the advice that I would give is to really think about what you want to accomplish and then tell people, because there's nothing lost by saying to people, I'd be really interested in joining you in that activity, or, being put forward for this opportunity. And yet it took me quite a long time to realize that that was a sensible thing to do. So I think that's the advice that I would give to any of you. Is to think about what it is you want to accomplish, and then to really step forward and ask and explain why you think that you'd be a great contributor.
Being very purposeful about what you want to do and advocating for yourself. Sometimes I give the advice, pretend you're advocating for your best friend. Somehow that seems to be an easier way to advocate for yourself, as if you're doing it for someone else. Negotiating salaries is another place I always say that. Pretend you're negotiating for your best friend. Molly, do you have any good advice you've received in the past? Oh, I think Molly may be having some issues with Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
I thought Swati's email or question was also.
Sorry, yes.
Oh, sorry. Do you want me to move on, Molly, or did you have something you wanted to add about good advice?
I think her Wi-Fi is going nuts, so we'll let her listen.
Okay, so Swati had a really interesting question, and I think we,
Sorry, I think I've got a bit of a lag.
Yeah. So how do you deal with men who are working to minimize you, make you less visible in the corporate world? For example, not inviting you to meetings and avoid letting higher ups see your contributions.
Yeah, Swati, look, I mean, I think, I'm hopeful that there's always going to be people like this in our organizations. And, they are often the people who are the least accomplished because they feel the need to put other people down. So I think in situations like this, whenever you have the opportunity to put forward your contributions and your ideas, it's important to do that. Again, there is this double bind issue that you need to do this in a way that makes it clear that you know that you're part of a team and you're still a team player, and yet these are your contributions. So I think that's the first thing to say. I think it's important to recruit others into that. So if you feel as if you in particular are not getting the recognition, asking colleagues and co-workers whether they see the world, whether they observe that as well. And if they do, to ask them to also advocate for what you're doing. If you speak up, to ask them to jump in and confirm, I agree with Swati's point, that's extremely helpful, or let me recognize Swati's work. And so I think there are ways of trying to use and this is where networks actually come in and are very powerful, is to use our professional networks at work to make sure that there are other people who are absolutely seeing you and your contributions. Sometimes I think group email is our friend, right? If you know that there's a meeting going on and you haven't been invited and you genuinely think that you should be there, I think just sort of replying to all in some email and just say, oh, I think you might have made a mistake and missed me off this. I'll be present at the meeting. So I think sometimes being a little bit, again, if it does seem as if you really ought to be there, just not assuming it's bad behavior, and perhaps simply saying, oh, must have left me off the email chain. I'll be at the meeting. I think sometimes one can use these sort of methods of deflecting a little bit. And then if those things get really serious, then obviously there are other things that we have to do. But those are some of the tips and ways I would start to do that. And as I say, use your team to help you and those other people around you in the organization to really start to sort of recognize your contributions.
I think that's some really good advice. Again, it takes a village in sort of having that network and a group of peers that are willing to also step up and again, self-advocating. I thought Matea had a really interesting question. Can you share any insights or advice for overcoming imposter syndrome and building confidence in one's abilities? Women deal with imposter syndrome insecurities much differently than men.
Mm-hmm. Yes, again, I mean, Matea, that's a really, really good example, isn't it, of where, oftentimes men may not feel like they belong. They often do feel like they belong. But even when they don't, they tend to sort of speak up. It's a bit, we know from the evidence, right, that if you see a job description and there are 5 things that are necessary, women may perhaps have 3 of them and say, oh, I'm not qualified. Men will have 3 of those things and say, I'm overqualified for the job. And so there is a sort of innate difference that we know and we observe, and that changes our behavior. I think it's really important with sort of imposter syndrome. So some of this does, again, come back to the physical presence. Women tend to have higher voices, on average be shorter, right? And so thinking about, again, where we stand in a room, where we are, where we sit. So there are things like that where we can just claim a position at the table. Oddly, I think Zoom helps us sometimes because there's a certain leveler, isn't there, really, about just being a head in a square. I think that can often be surprisingly useful. There are things to do with voice, right? There's also things to do with practice. When women are nervous, they tend to babble more. And, I do a lot of speaking in public, and I noticed that when I used to walk on a stage to start giving a big talk, I'd probably spend the first minute saying something self-deprecating, because that's both culturally and sort of female, kind of how an English woman might deal with nerves and imposter syndrome. And so what I did was I used to write a script for the first couple of minutes, what I was going to say, maybe the first 5 sentences. And it wasn't that I couldn't remember what to say. It was that script allowed me to overcome my nerves and it stopped me babbling. And once I'd said those first 3 or 4 sentences, then I was fine. And I would continue with whatever it was I was speaking about. And so I think that there are these small things that if you think about, how does that imposter syndrome manifest? Then you can really think about those things that allow you to overcome your nerves and be your most professional self in any setting. And by the way, it's not easy. I mean, these things make us all feel nervous, and they do need practice. I think the assumption that we could all walk into rooms and sort of be authentically claiming power just isn't the cultural reality that we inhabit. And what that means is that we have to work together, find other people who are having similar experiences, which is why I love as Molly said, the sort of psychological safety of the program, and then be really hard-nosed about what are the methods that we need to use, because we really are trying to accomplish important goals. So let's make sure that we give ourselves the practice that we need.
Yeah. Evelyn has an interesting question. I'm looking to move into the C-suite of my organization. How can this program help with that?
Mm-hmm. Evelyn, excellent. So we really are focused in this program on women wanting to take that next step in their journey. Many of the women who take our program have been deep, deep, deep experts in particular areas, whether it's in law or banking, in academia and science and engineering. And they are absolutely ready to move into much more senior leadership roles, including C-suite kind of roles. And we find that the toolkit in this program is one that allows you to say, all right, to get to this point, it's often been my expertise. And I hope that my expertise will have spoken for itself. as an academic, I might say it's the number of papers I've written, it's the number of students I've taught. In law, it's the number of cases you've prosecuted. But as you take that next step, that expertise won't be enough. It'll be the thing that got you into the room. But now you've got to move forward as a really authentic and powerful female leader. And so this program, we talk about goals. We talk about the strategic networks that you need to get there. We'll talk about the negotiation strategies that you need to use. We'll talk about the physical presence that you have to practice. And we will, really work on your own journey and the journey for you for the next 6 months, 12 months, 3 years, and help you think through what are the things in the toolkit that you need to bring together so that you can really, both act up into that senior leadership role even before you get it. And then once you're in that role, how you can be really effective and bring your organization along with you. So again, this is not about any one of us moving up and leaving everyone else behind. It's moving up so that we can create that transformation in our organizations.
Yeah. Very exciting to have someone who's looking to go into the C-suite. Is there an ideal candidate for this program?
I mean, I think that's exactly, the moment is often people who have been, deeply successful in a specific kind of deep domain area who are moving up into C-suite-like roles, who are really taking on a much wider span of responsibility, who want to step up into those much broader management positions of power, and who want to show that they are both capable, and then as they get into those roles can really sort of shift and become even more effective, shifting from a sort of expertise-based sources of power to really claiming that authentic, managerial leadership position in the organization. Molly, what else would you say about the ideal people for us?
I mean, I agree. We get a lot of people who are at an inflection point. We, as I mentioned at the beginning, we get people who in the past 15, 20 years haven't had any time to focus on themselves and are looking for the opportunity to maybe even just take a breath and think about what's next, if that's not clear. I would invite you, it is possible to connect us directly, connect to us via our website. So if you're not sure whether this is the right program for you at this time and whether we can bring you value, I would invite you to reach directly out, and we're happy to have a discussion.
Well, I want to thank you both for being here. This has been a lively conversation. I want to thank all of the audience who listened in and joined, and the great questions and comments we've received. I know we didn't get to all of them, so we're thinking about creating a blog that will answer some of the questions afterwards. We'll also be sending a recording of this LinkedIn Live to anyone who registered for the event. And as you see on the screen, if you are interested in learning more about the MIT Women's Leadership Program, please check us out on the website, and we look forward to answering any questions you may have and hopefully seeing you on campus in the program. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, everybody.